The check washing scam is an old scam with a dangerous new twist. So dangerous, in fact, that CBS News exposed this just a few weeks ago. This scam is costing people billions of dollars a year, and the big reason is that the risk now sits with you in many cases and not your bank in terms of who pays for that fraudulent check. I'll talk to you about exactly what's going on and how to protect yourself. Coming up next on Holy Schmidt.
Holy Schmidt!
Over the years, we've educated viewers on what I consider to be some of the most nefarious scams out there. And this would fall into that category. If it makes it onto a video, I think it's something that many people would fall for, perhaps even me under certain circumstances. Recently, I was contacted by a viewer by email. They sent in a question to what normally is the inbox for our live stream. And in that email, he told me that he lost $31,000 in a check washing scam. And I started looking into it because, frankly, I remember check washing scams being something of the 80s and 90s, and it was always the bank that was responsible for making good on that issue. So how could someone lose $31,000? And I was shocked at what I found. Two things have changed over the years. One is that the policies within banks have changed, and they put much more of the risk on the customer rather than the bank. The other is that bad guys have found a really good way to make this scam work and not get caught. I'm going to explain both next. Picture this. You, like so many people, owe money at tax time. It might be to the IRS, it might be to the state, it might be to your county, but you owe money and you have to write a big check. This is the basis, by the way, of the CBS story, and the person they were reporting on is a gentleman by the name of Todd who lost $10,000. But we're going to put him aside for a moment and just talk about how this could affect you. You, like Todd, write a check and put it in an envelope, and you walk it to the bank. Now, why do you walk it to the bank? Because it's April 15th, and you want to make sure that it has the right stamp on it, because you know that if it's stamped a day later, you might owe penalties to the IRS. About a week later, you're at the ATM, and you notice that a couple of days earlier, your account had dropped by $10,000, the exact amount of the check. Now, frankly, you're relieved because you sent it by first-class mail, not by priority mail, and you just put a stamp on it. And so it was great to know that that check arrived and the IRS had their money. You move on with your life, and a couple of months later, you get a letter from the IRS. And the IRS says, "Thanks for the tax return. Where is our $10,000? Now, the first thought you have, and many people would have in this situation, is that the IRS just didn't reconcile my payment with my tax return because I filed my tax return electronically through something like TurboTax, and I had to send in my payment manually. So you start gathering the information you need to respond to the IRS. And the first place you stop is the bank, or at least online at the bank anyway. And since banks don't send out canceled checks anymore, and frankly, most people, or at least a lot of people, have their bank statements sent to them electronically because they're worried somebody's going to get their statement in their mailbox and just take it and know their financial information, you need to go online. And you go online and you download your statement from 2 months earlier. And as you're looking through that statement, your stomach drops because you see the check. It has been cashed, it's for the right amount, but it's no longer made out to the IRS. It's made out to somebody whose name you've never seen before. The first thing you do is you contact your bank telling them that there's been fraud. In Todd's case, his bank was Wells Fargo. But you expect that there's going to be resolution in your favor because you didn't write a check to this individual who cashed your check. In fact, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't send cash. You didn't give out your password. You hand-delivered your check to the post office. Everything you did was exactly the way you should have done it. Surely you think this type of fraud would be covered by the bank, but you would be dead wrong. And the reason is because it's been more than 30 days. The bank manager, the person you've known for years in some cases, tells you that he's so sorry that it happened to you, but you needed to check your statement. It's out of his control. Now think about this honestly for a moment. How many people would actually catch this in 30 days? My guess is less than 50% of the people watching this video would catch this. And the reason is that everything went down exactly as you would expect it to go down. You sent the check out in the amount of $10,000. $10,000 came out of your account, and the payee didn't notify you that you were missing a payment. And that's the nature of the IRS, by the way, and a lot of government agencies. It takes time. In Todd's case, it was more than 2 months, but yours might be 3 or 4. Who knows? And like a lot of people, when you receive notification that your statement is available, you're not going to go online and check it immediately because everything is as it should be. It's not like you wrote out a check for $1,000 and $10,000 got cashed. And most importantly, no one assumes that a fraudulent check becomes the customer's problem. That doesn't even sound like it should be the customer's problem. It sounds like it should be the bank's problem. Shouldn't the bank check the signature? Shouldn't the bank know who is opening that account so that they can go after them if they deposit a fraudulent check? But here's what makes this scam so dangerous. The amount was correct, the signature was correct, and all the scammer had to do was remove 3 letters, IRS, from that check and replace those letters with another name. And it's easy to do, or let's just say it's not super difficult to do, with acetone or bleach if you have the right technique, I suppose. And without the old safety net of your old checks, your canceled checks being sent back to you, and a paper statement being sent to you in many cases, you can see how someone might not notice this for months because everything is as it should be. At least it looks that way. And here's the scary part. As I film this in December of 2025, tax season is right around the corner. And if it can happen to Todd, it could happen to you or anyone if you send a check in the mail, a big check. And if you're like the average person out there, you're going to wait until about the week before April 15th to send that check. Now, anybody who gets their hands on, say, 4 or 5 envelopes addressed to the Internal Revenue Service around the 15th of April can assume that there are checks inside, at least for many of them. And if they can set up a system where they can get their hands on 4 or 5 of those checks, whether they have an illegal relationship with someone who works at the Postal Service, or they simply just drive around the neighborhood and look for mailboxes with the flag up around April 15th, if they get several of those checks, they're going to be able to do exactly what we're talking about right here with your check. So how to protect yourself? Well, there are some very specific steps that you can take to reduce the risk. You can't eliminate the risk altogether if you're writing a check anyway, but there are things you can do to reduce the risk, and we're going to talk about those next. Gang, if you're still using cumbersome spreadsheets to manage your personal finances, you're doing it the hard way. I personally use and recommend BOLDIN. They're one of only 3 affiliates that we have on this channel, and I personally use BOLDIN personal financial planning software. If you want to get your finances in order for the future, BOLDIN is giving away 2 weeks free. Simply go to go.boldin.com/Schmidt, and you can get 2 weeks free of their full feature software. After that, it's $12 a month paid annually. In order to protect yourself, you need to know in easy to understand terms exactly how check washing works. Check washing is when a criminal steals a check that's made out to somebody and changes either the name or the amount or both. Changing the name is much easier, which is why April 15th is a really good day for them, because they don't have to change the amount. Changing the amount requires them to change the numbers and the letters written out to say what the numbers contain. I'm not sure I could say that 3 times fast, but you understand what I'm talking about. Once they change the check, they either deposit it or cash it, depending on the situation. The check itself is real. The signature is real. Usually the amount is real. The only thing that has been changed is the payee. And how does it happen? Well, you mail a check, taxes, a donation, your rent, whatever it is that you're sending out, and they intercept the check in transit. Oftentimes, they just take it right out of your mailbox. Sometimes there's somebody inside the Postal Service who is getting paid to take checks that look like they might be checks and giving them to somebody who's going to do something with them. Chemicals like acetone or bleach are applied surgically to remove only the ink with the name and nothing else. And then a new name is written right over the top in the same color ink, and it looks completely legitimate. That person then deposits that check in an account that they set up just for this, or they cash it at a check cashing store. Now, if you're talking about a check made out to the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, the funds are all but guaranteed to be in there because not too many people like bouncing a check to the IRS. So around April 15th is prime time for this type of scam. Federal banking rules mean that the bank has no more than 2 business days to process that check if it's a local check. Local means in the same city, maybe even in the same state. And they have 5 days to process a check from out of town. Once that period of time has passed, the funds will have moved from the originating bank to the exiting bank. So the bad guy would clearly set up an account locally to take advantage of this if they were going to use a bank to clear this, which means that it will be cleared within 2 days. And under current banking rules, if you don't catch it within 30, oftentimes it's your problem, it's not the bank's. Victims don't notice this scam often for months, maybe even a full quarter or more, because the IRS doesn't let you know you haven't paid them immediately. Oftentimes they wait 2 or 3 or 4 months or more as they're processing tax returns from other people around April 15th anyway. And one of the reasons that this works is because most people still use ballpoint pens. We'll talk about that in just a moment because there is another choice. It's not a perfect choice, but it's a better choice. And who's most at risk? Older adults who still pay their bills by check, small businesses who pay their bills by check, and anybody around April 15th who pays the IRS by check. So how do you decrease the likelihood that you're going to owe money with a scam like this? Well, first, understand what the banking rules are. Banking rules around debit cards and checks are particularly weak, particularly if you're measuring them against, say, rules around credit cards. The safest way, by the way, is to avoid mailing checks altogether and use an electronic payment system. A lot of people don't like doing that. They like the control of being able to write a check and waiting for it to be deposited. But know that electronic payment is much safer. In fact, it eliminates this particular scam altogether. But if you must write a check, use a gel pen, not a ballpoint pen, because gel pen ink binds to paper much more aggressively than ballpoint pen ink. Now, the big issue you might face with a gel pen is that it's unlikely to be in your top drawer. Why? Because they're expensive. And fewer than 1 out of 20 pens are gel pens. The rest are ballpoint pens. So you need to actively go out and get a gel pen if you want to reduce the risk that this happens to you. Next, avoid mailing checks from your mailbox, particularly around April 15th. That red flag that goes up to alert the post person that there's mail for them to pick up also notifies the bad guys that there's mail for them to look through. Instead, go to the post office and put your check in the mailbox inside the post office. Not the one out front, but the one inside the post office. Next, monitor your bank accounts frequently, particularly if you don't normally monitor your bank account frequently, which is hard to do. And let me explain why. There's something called negative confirmation. And basically, negative confirmation works like this. If I wanted to book a hotel for New Year's Eve 2026, so call it a year from now, I make a phone call to the hotel and give them my credit card. They say, Mr. Schmidt, we won't charge your card until the day, but we have your reservation on file. You hang up the phone, you put it in your calendar, and you forget about it. Fast forward, it's New Year's Eve 2026. You get to the hotel desk and you try to check in, and the person behind the desk says, I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have your reservation, even though the person on the phone said you're confirmed. The person behind the desk says to you, do you have the email confirmation? Now, when they ask that question, they know the answer is going to be no, because you wouldn't have an email confirmation for something that they made a mistake on their end. And that's the problem I have with negative confirmation. If someone in the chain on the other side makes a mistake and you never get that email confirmation, you're not going to know that you should have gotten the email because you didn't get the email. All you know is that you spoke with somebody on the phone and they told you you were good to go. And that's the problem with your bank account. If you don't know to look for fraud, well, you aren't going to see fraud, most likely. You're looking for negative confirmation. You have to be very sharp, and you have to scrutinize everything that goes through your account, and most people don't do that. Regardless of whether you caught it or not, here's what you need to do. First, contact your bank ASAP. Me, Jeff Schmidt, personally, I would actually walk into the bank if I couldn't talk to the bank manager, because it's much harder for someone who's looking you in the eyes to discount the issue and put it in a pile to deal with later, particularly if you've done business with this individual in the past. The second is file a fraud report, whether it's with the police or with the bank or both. And the reason is that you might be able to recover something from your insurance. It depends on your insurance, I suppose, but it's much harder to recover if you don't have some sort of report to present to them. Also, report the mail theft to the Postal Service for two reasons. One, because if there's a problem in their system, who knows, they might actually catch the person, or you might be one of 10 that this has happened to in your city, and it helps them triangulate on the problem and the person. The second is you might need it for insurance, just like filing with the police department or with your bank. If the bank tells you to close the affected account, I would close the affected account. Even though it's just one check, your bank account and routing number is now out there. And a lot of times thieves will put that information in a file and either reuse it themselves 6 months or a year later or sell it to somebody else. And finally, expect the investigation to take time, even if you ultimately end up recovering the money. And the reason is simple. The originating bank is probably responsible for the issue, not the bank that paid the money, not your bank. The originating bank was responsible for making sure that the customer, was the one who was supposed to check the signature. And if they let it through, they have no incentive to move any faster than they really need to move to make things right. Whereas if it was your bank, well, you have a relationship with them and maybe even have a lot of money with them. Who knows? They have a much higher incentive, but there's only so much they can do if they weren't the bank that originally took the check. Gang, if you have a scam that you'd like us to film a video on, just put it in the description below and we'll consider it. We'll put it on our list to review. And who knows, we might do a video on the one that you introduced to us. If you like this video, check out that video, $120,000 stolen from her IRA, the ACATS scam exposed. Also, don't forget to check out BOLDIN Personal Financial Planning Software. Get 2 weeks free. Go to go.boldin.com/Schmidt, and you can start your 2-week free trial instantly. This is Jeff Schmidt, and I will see you in that video right there.